The Second World War had co-opted music as a tool of ideology and used it both as a weapon and a means of resistance. But one of the most celebrated pieces of the period was a work of protest from a composer who refused to take sides at all. Michael Tippett was the son of a suffragette who grew up in rural Suffolk. He used music as an expression of his deeply held pacifist beliefs. Appalled by Britain's retaliation in response to the rise of Nazism, Tippett resisted conscription as a conscientious objector, ultimately going to prison for a few months for refusing to comply with the conditions. Tippett's musical response to the war was a child of our time. He used his major oratorio to explore the theme of the individual's fate under the forces of social oppression. Introducing a performance of the work in 1977, Tippett revealed how it was inspired by real-life events that led to war.
The story that forms the center of A Child of Our Time was based on a real event of 1938. A young refugee hiding in a great city, shot and killed a high-ranking diplomat in an embassy in protest against what was happening to his mother. This act of personal vengeance precipitated a public vengeance of such horror that the only answer, if that's the right word, was a third and total vengeance, the war itself. It asks the question, what happens when individual acts of apparently righteous protest produce ensuing and colossal catastrophes? A Child of Our Time, I feel, offers no clear answers. Yet moments of release, perhaps even of comfort. These moments are the 5 spirituals that come at special places in the score. Moments when the performers and the viewers could, metaphorically at least, sing together.
A Child of Our Time premiered in London in March 1944. The piece was a sensation and established Tippett as one of the most important composers of his generation.
Mankind has perpetrated unimaginable horrors, giving us very little ground for optimism. Can I, in my music, remake that dream? Deep river, my home is over Jordan. I want to cross over into campground, Lord. I want to cross over into campground.
Clearly, when he's writing a work like Child of Our Time, he's making a plea for peace, for compassion, for anything other than war. Child of Our Time, in some ways, is the most clear-cut piece of political music that any British composer has written, I think.
For the whole of my life, my creative work has been determined by what is happening in the world outside and by what is happening in the world inside, that is inside me.
Michael would have got on very well with Bono. They both tried to do the same thing with music and use the platform, you know, to make political statements and to try and stop appalling hardship around the world. So he had a huge social conscience.
Determined to spread his message as far and wide as possible, Tippett embraced broadcasting as a way of reaching an audience beyond the concert hall. For a 1964 edition of Workshop, Tippett got his hands dirty with the business of actually directing a televised performance of his work.
Good evening. I'm producer of Workshop, and before we get going with this program, I'd just like to tell you something about it. It's based, of course, on the music which you can see and hear being played behind me, the Concerto for Double String Orchestra by Michael Tippett. Michael Tippett is upstairs somewhere.
That was one of the first workshop programs I did, was to show Michael looking at how cameras photograph music and getting the very best for his own work, the double concerto.
My feeling as a composer at that moment is that what is happening is that it's being all built up from these cellos, tori, 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 and it's a feeling of growing from the cello line, and not a feeling of anything crossways. You see, that although that exciting shot, I think we have let it go.
Yes, I think so too.
The very fact that he was in a studio allowing us to film him talking about how to film his music showed just how committed he was to the democratic. In a sense, rather like Copland, he saw that television was a medium for good.
The cellos lifting the music until they are suddenly quite electric by the time they reach there.
I think his music is at its best, as deeply moving as anything ever written by an Englishman.
And 4.
64.
Well done, chaps. And fade.